The message came as a cold line of text on Jax's wristcom. Deliver the alien widow and her child to the trade auction. No questions. Deadline, 36 hours. Jax stood alone in the dim corridor of the orbital station. The metal walls hummed with the endless vibration of reactors deep below. Around him, traders rushed with crates of weapons, minerals, and rare creatures from distant worlds. The air smelled like rust and burned ozone. Jax barely noticed anymore. He had done many jobs in this place, but this one felt different the moment he read it. Something heavy settled in his chest. He walked through the maze of corridors until he reached the holding sector. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the cargo cell was small and dark. A single weak light blinked overhead. In the corner, huddled together, were the 2 lives he had been ordered to sell. The alien widow sat straight, her thin shoulders wrapped in a torn gray cloak. Her skin had a pale violet tone, bruised in places, but her posture was proud. Beside her, a small child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, curled close, eyes wide and silent. Their eyes were the same color, deep silver, glowing faintly in the dim light like starlight trapped in tears. They did not speak when Jax entered. They only watched him. The woman's gaze was sharp, full of quiet defiance. The child's tiny fingers gripped her cloak like it was the only safe thing in the universe. Jax cleared his throat. You've been assigned for auction. His voice sounded flat even to himself. I'm here to transport you. No answer, just silence. Then the woman slowly lowered her eyes as if refusing to give him even the satisfaction of anger. Jax tried to stand tall, to feel like the loyal station trader he was supposed to be, but the silence pressed against him like cold water. He remembered the list of buyers he had seen earlier. Weapons dealers, flesh merchants, mining barons who bought living workers the same way they bought scrap metal. He looked at the child again. Thin arms, hollow cheeks, still no tears. The child had probably learned long ago that crying meant punishment. Food? He asked. The woman gave the smallest nod. Jax slid a ration pack through the hatch. The child opened it fast, hands trembling. The mother didn't eat. She just watched her child chew slowly, forcing them to take small bites to make it last. That quiet care hit Jax harder than any words. As he turned to leave, he caught his own reflection in the glass wall. Gray eyes, tired lines, and the sharp insignia on his jacket. He remembered when that insignia used to mean something. Honor. Order. Now it only meant survival. He had worked for the station for 9 years, carrying cargo, guarding convoys, collecting debts. He had seen cruelty before. He had told himself it was normal, but this felt wrong in a way he could not explain. Back in his quarters, Jax sat on his narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. The order's words glowed on his wrist display. Deliver them. No questions. He imagined the woman at an auction platform, chains on her wrists. He imagined the child crying as strangers argued over his price. His jaw tightened. A dull hum filled the air as the station shifted orbit. Somewhere far below, ships were landing, unloading more cargo, more lives to be sold. He tried to sleep, but his mind kept returning to those silver eyes. In the deep hours of the night cycle, Jax returned to the holding sector. He told the guard on duty that he was preparing the cargo early. The guard barely glanced at him. Nobody cared what happened to the lost or the weak here. Inside the cell, the child was asleep, curled in the woman's arms. The woman stayed awake, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She looked at Jax with no fear, only exhaustion. I will keep your child safe, she said softly in broken standard. The words struck him like a blade. She was not begging. She was promising. Even in a cage, even knowing she was about to be sold, her only thought was to protect her child. Jax stood frozen. He had no answer. He turned and walked out before he could say something foolish. Outside, he leaned against the cold wall and closed his eyes. He knew what the right thing was, according to the station. Obey orders, deliver them, forget their faces. That was the rule. But his heart whispered something else, something dangerous, and as the station lights dimmed to night mode, Jax realized something he had not felt in years. He did not want to obey. The station never truly slept. Even during the night cycle, the long metal corridors whispered with the sound of engines, air pumps, and distant machinery. But in Jax's quarters, everything was silent except for the soft ticking of the wall chrono and the restless beat of his own heart. He sat at his desk, The dim glow of the data screen painting shadows across his tired face. The list of registered buyers floated before his eyes. It was a long scroll of names, numbers, and reputation scores. He scrolled down slowly, hoping to find even one that wasn't poison. But every name dripped with darkness. One was a slaver from the Iron Moons, famous for breaking minds and bending them into obedience. Another was a weapons magnate who bought living test subjects like they were spare parts. A third was a mining lord who worked children to death on poison worlds. Jax's finger hovered over the send key. His orders were clear. All he had to do was pick a buyer, send the cargo, and collect the credits. That was how this place worked. That was how he had worked for years, but his hand didn't move. Instead, he heard something soft. A sound that didn't belong in this cold place. Jax stood and crossed the corridor to the holding sector, silent as a ghost. The guards had switched to the night rotation, half asleep at their post. They didn't notice when he slipped past. Inside the cell, the air was dim and still. The child slept curled like a small star, their chest rising and falling in tiny breaths. The alien widow sat against the wall, awake, eyes half closed, humming a quiet song in her strange language. It was soft and slow, like starlight drifting through black water. Jax froze. The sound reached deep into some buried place inside him. He saw flashes of another face, younger, human. His little sister from years ago before the war took her. He remembered how she used to hum herself to sleep when storms rattled the roof of their home. The widow noticed him then. Her eyes opened fully, glowing faint silver in the dark. She didn't stop humming. She just looked at him, calm, unafraid. Jax swallowed hard and turned away. Back in his quarters, he stared again at the screen. The buyers' names glared back like open mouths. His hands trembled. What would happen to them if he obeyed? He imagined the child screaming in a cage. He imagined the widow's eyes emptied of their light. He imagined himself walking away, pretending it was just business. He couldn't. For the first time in years, Jax felt something he thought he had buried: guilt. He opened a secret menu on his data console, a hidden control panel only smugglers and old station rats knew about. He entered a maintenance code and accessed the station trade logs. There he found the cargo tag for the widow and her child. One press. One command: delete cargo entry. His finger hovered over the button. If he did this, he would become a traitor. The station tracked everything. If someone noticed the deletion, they would trace it to him. He would lose his license, his credits, maybe his life, but if he didn't... Jax pressed the key. The screen blinked. The cargo listing vanished. Gone like smoke, Jax exhaled shakily. For the first time, the buzzing in his skull went quiet. He wasn't sure if he had just saved 2 lives or destroyed his own. He shut down the console and moved quickly. He packed extra ration bars, thermal cloaks, and a stolen access card into his satchel. He hid a pulse pistol inside his jacket, though he prayed he would not need it. Then he went back to the holding sector. The corridor lights were low, flickering in their tired sockets. The guards were asleep again. He used the access card to bypass the lock. Inside, the widow's eyes widened as the door slid open. The child stirred, blinking in confusion. "Quiet," Jax whispered. The widow rose slowly, clutching the child's hand. "You are not selling us?" she asked carefully. Jax shook his head. "No, not anymore." The widow stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Jax knelt down to the child. "We have to move fast. No sound, no lights. Can you do that?" The child nodded, wide-eyed but brave. Jax took a deep breath. This was madness, pure madness. But as he led them out of the dark cell into the cold, echoing corridor, he felt something strange spark in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Hope. The air of the station felt colder that night. Jax walked fast, keeping his shoulders hunched, eyes down, pretending he belonged there. The alien widow followed close behind, her torn cloak hiding her silver glow. The child held her hand tightly, small feet silent on the metal floor. Every few meters, Jax paused to scan the corners. The corridors were mostly empty. The night shift always moved slow, half asleep, thinking only of warm beds and cheap drinks. But Jax knew how quickly that could change. One wrong sound, one curious guard, and alarms would flood the whole deck. They reached a maintenance hatch hidden behind a stack of rusted crates. Jax pulled the cover loose and crawled inside first. The shaft was narrow, lined with pipes and wires, smelling of oil and metal dust. "Come," he whispered. The widow pushed the child ahead of her and followed on hands and knees. The hatch sealed behind them with a soft click. Darkness wrapped around them like cold cloth. Jack switched on a small red light. The glow was faint, barely enough to see, but it would not trigger the motion sensors. "Stay close. Stay quiet," he said. The child nodded, wide-eyed but silent. They began to crawl. The vent stretched like a maze through the old bones of the station. Jax had memorized these passages years ago when he smuggled forbidden tech for credits. Now they were his only path to freedom. Metal scraped against their clothes as they moved. Every sound seemed too loud. Halfway through the first tunnel, they heard footsteps echoing from the corridor below. The child froze. The widow pulled them gently close, pressing a finger to her lips. Jax held his breath. 2 guards passed under the vent, talking lazily about ration shortages. Their boots rang like hammers in the silence. Then they were gone. Jax exhaled slowly. They kept crawling. Time blurred inside the twisting metal tubes. Sweat rolled down Jax's back. His arms ached from pulling himself forward. The child trembled from cold and fear, but never cried. The widow kept whispering soft words in her language, soothing them, keeping them calm. Finally, they reached a vertical shaft. Jax attached a magnetic rope to the wall and began climbing. His boots clinked on the bolts. The climb felt endless. His muscles screamed. Halfway up, an alarm wailed somewhere distant. Jax froze. The widow looked up sharply. "Is us?" she whispered. "Not yet," he said, but his voice shook. They climbed faster. The shaft opened into a wide junction where several vents crossed. Jax stopped to catch his breath. He opened a small panel on his wristcom and scanned the station map. His heart sank. Patrol routes were changing. Security drones were sweeping Deck 9, the deck where they needed to pass through. "We'll go under them," Jax said, thinking fast. "Through the waste chute." The widow frowned, confused. "Waste? Old cargo chute. Not used anymore," he said. "Smells bad. Safer." They crawled into a narrow tunnel sloping down. The smell hit them like a wall. Stale air, old chemicals, forgotten things. The child gagged quietly. The widow covered their nose gently and kept moving. The tunnel dropped steeply, almost like a slide. Jax went first, landing hard in the dark. Dust rose around him. He helped the child down, then the widow. They crouched among piles of broken machinery, old food packs, and cracked storage pods. It was filthy but hidden. Above them, sirens began to scream. "Alert," a cold station voice boomed in the distance. "Cargo data missing. All sectors locked down. All units searched." Jax's blood went cold. They had discovered the deletion. The hunt had begun. "Move," he whispered sharply. They hurried through the shadows, weaving between wreckage and dark corners. The alarms grew louder. Red warning lights flashed through distant grates like heartbeat pulses. At last they reached a forgotten maintenance hatch that opened near the lower docks. Jax forced it open with a crowbar, the metal shrieking softly. Cool air rushed in, tasting of engine fumes and starship oil. Beyond this hatch lay the hangar bay. And his ship. Jax turned to the widow and the child. Their faces were streaked with grime and fear, but their eyes still held that faint silver light. "Almost there," he said. The widow touched his arm lightly, just for a moment. A silent thank you. Jax nodded. Then he crawled out of the shadows first, pistol ready, heart thundering. The alarms roared. Searchlights swept the decks above. Drones buzzed like angry wasps. Jax whispered to himself as they ran for the hangar. Just a little further. Just one more breath. The hangar bay was silent. Too silent. Rows of abandoned cargo ships rested like sleeping beasts under the dim blue lights. Shadows stretched long across the cracked floor. Far above, giant viewing windows showed endless black space dotted with cold stars. Jax crouched behind a stack of old fuel drums, scanning the area. The alarms had stopped, but the silence felt even more dangerous. Somewhere out there, security drones were still hunting. They always hunted quietly. His own ship sat alone in the far corner, a small rusted freighter called the Wayfarer. It wasn't fast, it wasn't strong, but it was his, and right now it was their only hope. Jax turned to the widow and her child. Their faces were pale under the blue light, eyes wide. The child gripped the widow's cloak tightly, chest rising and falling fast. "Listen," Jax whispered, voice low but steady. "We walk slow, quiet, no running. If lights move, drop flat and don't breathe." The widow nodded. Her silver eyes shone faintly like cold moonlight. The child mimicked her, brave but trembling. They moved. Step by careful step they crossed the empty hangar. Each sound, the soft pad of boots, the rustle of cloth, felt too loud. Jax kept his pistol hidden under his coat, finger near the trigger. His ears strained for the faint buzz of a drone. Halfway across, a beam of light swept from the far wall. Down, Jax hissed. They dropped flat behind a stack of crates. The light slid across the floor, paused, then moved on. Jax's heart slammed against his ribs. Sweat ran down his neck. They stayed frozen until the light faded. Then they rose and moved again. At last, they reached the Wayfarer. Its metal skin was scarred from old battles, paint peeling, but to Jax it had never looked more beautiful. He opened the side hatch with a soft hiss of hydraulics. Inside, he whispered. The widow helped the child climb the small ramp. The child's eyes lit up at the sight of the cockpit's glowing buttons. For the first time, a flicker of wonder pushed through their fear. Jax sealed the hatch behind them, locking out the cold silence of the hangar. Inside, the air smelled like old oil and metal, but also like safety. The widow stood quietly, scanning the small cabin. She seemed unsure whether to trust the space around her. Jax offered a ration bar. She took it slowly and broke it in half, giving the larger piece to her child. The child chewed with wide eyes, legs dangling from the seat. Jax powered up the engines. The lights flickered, then glowed warm. The familiar hum filled the cabin, and something tight in his chest loosened. The ship had not failed him yet. He prayed it would not fail tonight. Hold on, he said. Thrusters rumbled, shaking the floor. The hangar doors opened with a deep groan. Cold stars stretched beyond like endless holes in the dark. The Wayfarer lifted, rising from the ground like a ghost breaking free from chains. Jax guided her gently forward, fingers steady on the controls. The stars grew larger. The station shrank behind them. Then they were out. Silence wrapped around them. True silence, the silence of space. No alarms, no boots, no orders. Only the slow heartbeat of the engines and the soft sound of breathing. The child pressed their hands to the glass viewport, silver eyes wide in wonder. Stars, they whispered. Jax watched their reflection in the glass, soft and full of life despite the fear. The widow came beside the child, placing a hand gently on their shoulder. She looked out too, and her face softened. For a moment, she did not look like a prisoner or a fugitive. She looked like a mother showing her child the universe. Jax said nothing. He didn't trust his voice. He set a random jump course through the outer lanes far from patrol routes. The engines charged with a low hum. He leaned back, exhaustion flooding his bones. His whole body ached, but he could not stop. Not yet, the child turned to him.
Are we safe now?
Jax hesitated. Then he nodded. For tonight, the widow met his eyes. There was no smile, but there was something new in her gaze, a quiet spark of trust. For the first time in years, Jax felt something warm in his chest. Not credits, not duty, something far rarer, hope. The Wayfarer drifted through the cold stretch of deep space, far from trade routes, far from patrols. For 2 days, silence had followed them like a shadow. Jax let himself hope, just a little, that they had escaped. But on the third day, the hunt began. It started as a faint ping on the radar, a distant dot blinking red, then another. Then 3 more. Jax frowned at the screen. No. No. The widow stood behind him, holding the child close. What is it? Hunters, Jax said quietly. They found our trail. The widow's silver eyes tightened. The child's small hands clutched her cloak. How? She whispered. Jax tapped the console. Ion trail. Every ship leaves one. They must have tracked our jump path. He switched off the nav beacon and cut the power to the lights. The cabin went dark, lit only by the dim glow of the stars outside. Stay silent, he said. No noise. No signals. He powered down the main engines and let the ship drift among the rocks of a shattered asteroid field. Outside, black stones the size of cities floated in slow motion, glowing faint orange from ancient impacts. The Wayfarer slid between them like a ghost. Hours passed. The hunters came closer. Their ships were fast and sharp, moving like silver knives through the dark. Their scanners swept the void with blue beams. Searching, Jax watched from the cockpit window, breath shallow, one wrong sound, one flash of heat, and they would be found, inside the ship. The child whispered, Are they going to take us? Jax turned, kneeling to meet their eyes. No. Not while I'm here. He opened a secret floor panel and revealed a small hollow space under the cockpit. Climb in. It's a hide hole. No sound, no light. Understand? The child nodded and crawled inside. The widow followed them with her eyes but stayed near Jax. I will help you fight, she said softly. Jax blinked at her. Fight? She nodded once. I know machines. I can make your ship. Faster. Jax stared for a second, then gave a small laugh. Faster is exactly what we need. While the hunters prowled the dark outside, the widow moved like quicksilver through the ship's guts. She pulled open panels, rewired fuel feeds, and rerouted power from the heating coils to the thrusters. Sparks danced on her fingers as if the ship was listening to her touch. Jax had flown with engineers before, but none like her. There was something elegant, almost graceful in the way she worked. Soon the engines hummed with new strength. Ready, she whispered. Jax slid into the pilot seat, hands tight on the controls. His heart thundered. When I say hold on, hold on. Through the cockpit glass he saw the hunters sweep around the far edge of the field, scanners glowing bright now. They were closing in, Jax whispered to himself. Now the engines roared to life. Blue flames burst from the thrusters. The Wayfarer shot out from behind the asteroid like a bullet from a gun. The hunters spun in shock. Alarms flashed across their hulls. Then they gave chase. Lasers streaked past the Wayfarer's tail, glowing lines of death cutting the void. Jax wove between tumbling rocks, dodging beams by inches. The ship rattled, shaking with every sharp turn. Faster, the widow shouted from behind him. Trying! Jax gritted his teeth. He dove into a narrow canyon between two massive stones. Lasers scorched the rock behind them. The hunters followed faster and closer. Jax slammed the hyperdrive switch. Come on, girl. Fly, the drive screamed. The stars outside stretched into white lines, then silence. They were gone. Jax slumped back in the chair, chest heaving. The Wayfarer floated through empty black space again, far from the hunters. Slowly he opened the hide hole. The child peeked out, eyes wide. We lived? Jax smiled weakly. Yeah, we lived. The widow stepped close, her face calm but her hands shaking. She placed a hand on Jax's shoulder. You saved us, Jax shook his head. No, we saved each other. Outside, the stars turned slowly like silent witnesses. But Jax knew this was not the end. The hunters would not stop. Not until they were sure he was dead. He looked at the two lives he had chosen to protect, and promised himself he would never let that happen. The Wayfarer limped through the darkness like a tired bird. After days of running, fuel was almost gone. The metal hull hummed weakly. Every part of the ship carried the scars of their desperate flight. Burned panels, cracked screens, and a faint smell of overheated wires. Jax sat at the controls, hollow-eyed, watching the map flicker. They needed a place to hide, not just for hours, for weeks. Somewhere the hunters would never think to look. Then he saw it, a forgotten mining moon drifting far beyond the trade lanes. Once rich in ore, now abandoned after the war. No signal, no patrols, no law. Perfect. He set the course. The moon appeared hours later, a dead rock floating under a thin gray glow. Old mining stations lay broken across its surface like skeletons. Craters scarred the ground, filled with frozen dust. It was ugly, empty, silent, and safe. The ship landed hard on the cracked plain with a screech of old landing gear. Dust rose like a ghost around them, then settled. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the child whispered, Is this our place now? Jax looked out at the ruins. If we make it. They stepped out into thin air under a black sky filled with stars. The wind was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of metal and stone. Silence wrapped around them like a blanket. The widow pulled her cloak tight around her shoulders, her silver eyes scanning the empty land. The child stayed close to her side, small hands clenched. Jax looked at the broken mining station nearby, half buried in dust, its roof collapsed but still standing. That's where we start. For 3 days they worked. Jax scavenged metal beams from fallen towers, dragging them with aching arms. The widow used her strange tools to fuse broken panels together, sparks glowing on her fingertips. The child sorted through piles of old crates, finding pieces of wire, cloth, and even cracked solar cells. Slowly, the ruins began to change. They patched holes in the station's walls with scrap metal. They cleared the main room of dust and rubble. They sealed air leaks with melted resin. On the fourth day, Jax powered the old generator with parts from the Wayfarer. The lights flickered and stayed on. The child laughed, truly laughed, for the first time. The sound echoed in the empty air, small but bright like a new star. The widow smiled faintly, and Jax felt something warm in his chest. They planted small food crates using hydrogel from the ship's emergency supplies. The widow carefully arranged the glowing soil capsules while the child sprinkled seeds with serious concentration. Jax watched them work, his arms crossed, a faint smile on his tired face. It felt unreal. Days ago they were running for their lives. Now they were planting hope in the dirt. At night they sat together by the soft hum of the generator, the child curled in a blanket between them, half asleep. The widow sat quiet but not distant anymore. Her silver eyes glowed gently in the dark as she watched the child dream. Jax leaned against the cold wall, looking out through a cracked window at the stars. Once, he had dreamed of owning a fleet, of making riches, of carving his name into the galaxy's trade routes. But in this quiet place, surrounded by broken metal and soft breathing, he felt something far better: belonging. The next morning, they painted the station's door. The child chose a color, bright orange from an old signal canister, and drew clumsy shapes. The widow added flowing lines from her own language. Jax added his initials in small letters at the corner. It wasn't just a ruin anymore, it was theirs. That night, Jax stood outside under the stars, the cold air biting his skin. He watched the moon's horizon glowing faint silver under the starlight. Somewhere far away, the hunters were still searching. He knew they would not stop, but he also knew something else: he would not run anymore. Not from them. Not from this new life. He went back inside, sealed the door, and lay down on the hard floor beside his new family. For the first time in years, he slept deeply. Weeks passed on the forgotten moon. The old mining station slowly turned into a home. The generator hummed softly through the nights. Tiny plants began sprouting in the hydro crates, glowing green under recycled light. The child's laughter now echoed through the metal halls. The widow smiled more often, though still quietly. And Jax, once just a trader running from debts and orders, found himself building things he never thought he would build: beds, doors, walls, and something even rarer: trust. But peace never lasts long. It began with a signal, sharp, distant, and deadly. Jax was repairing the outer wall when his wrist comm crackled. A red warning blinked across the screen. Incoming vessels. Unknown ID, high speed. His blood went cold. He ran inside. They found us. The widow froze mid-step. The child dropped a spanner, eyes wide. How? The widow whispered. Hunters never stop, Jax said, voice tight. They must have caught a trace from the old ship beacons. Outside, the sky filled with black shapes. 3 hunter ships cut through the stars like sharp blades, engines screaming. Their weapons glowed like molten suns. The widow straightened her shoulders. We fight, Jax stared at her. Then he nodded. There was no other choice. He turned to the child. You remember the hide hole on the ship? The child frowned. No, I stay. I help. Jax knelt, meeting their silver eyes. You can help more by staying hidden. Remember the signal jammer I showed you? Activate it when I say, okay? The child hesitated, then nodded. They moved fast. The widow ran to the Wayfarer, powering its guns from the patched generator. Sparks danced in her hands as she fused broken circuits, her eyes burning with fierce light. Jax climbed into the cockpit, powering the old engines. The ship roared awake like a wounded beast, shaking the dusty ground. Above them, the hunter ships dove. Lasers scorched the dirt, exploding old mining towers into burning shards. The ground shook. The air turned to fire. Now! Jax shouted. The child hit the jammer switch. A pulse of static spread across the sky. The hunter ship's targeting systems flickered. Their beams went wild, slicing empty air. Jax launched the Wayfarer off the ground, dust swirling behind them. The widow strapped into the gunner seat, fingers flying over the controls. Left! She shouted. Jax swung the ship hard. A hunter ship screamed past, missing by meters. The widow fired. Bright bolts tore across the black, smashing into its side. The ship spun away in flames. Good shot, Jax yelled. Again, the widow said simply. The second hunter locked onto them. Jax dove low through the jagged remains of the mining rigs, weaving between metal bones. Beams scorched the air behind them. The widow's eyes glowed silver as she tracked their movement. She fired again. The second hunter exploded in a blinding flash, pieces raining down like dying stars. One left. The last hunter dove straight at them, weapons burning. Jack slammed the thrusters to full. The Wayfarer screamed upward, engines blazing blue. The two ships twisted around each other in the dark sky like furious birds. "Hold steady," the widow whispered. Jax did. The hunter came close, too close, until Jax could see the glow of its cockpit. "Now," the widow shouted. They fired together. Twin blasts hit the hunter's core. It vanished in a silent fireball. Silence returned. Only the stars watched as the debris drifted down, glowing faintly against the black. Jax lowered the ship back onto the cracked plane. The Wayfarer groaned but held. The child ran out of the station, eyes bright with fear and joy. "You did it," they cried. Jack stepped down from the cockpit, legs shaking. The widow joined him, her face streaked with ash and sweat. The child threw their arms around both of them. Jax froze, then slowly hugged them back. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was their hearts beating together. Jax looked at them, the small child with brave eyes and the widow who had once been silent in a cage. They were not cargo, not fugitives, not burdens. They were his. He smiled, tired but real. "You're my family now." The widow's silver eyes softened. She reached out, touching his hand gently. The child beamed, holding them both. Above them, the stars turned slowly, endless and bright. For the first time in his life, Jax did not feel alone. And as the three of them walked back toward their little home, their shadows stretched across the broken land, not as strangers but as a family made by choice.